In my newsletter, by the way, I have a newsletter. You can find a link to it in the description of this video. I asked my readers to tell me questions that they had about Shakespeare, his time period, his plays, basically all of the things that I'm going to try and talk about in my videos on this channel. And by the way, you can leave questions too, just in the comments on this video or any of the videos. There were a bunch of really interesting, insightful questions, and I immediately ignored all of them in favor of the one question that I think may have been submitted as a joke. But I got really fascinated by it, and I wanted to try to answer it. So the question was, how can I enjoy Shakespeare more? And that is what this video is going to try to answer. How you can approach watching Shakespeare if you are reluctant or uncertain or have never really liked it before. A little bit of background just for myself. I didn't see my first Shakespeare play until I was 14. It was Richard III and I fell asleep. And then at the end I woke up because there was a big battle and it was really loud. When I went to college and wanted to get more serious about Shakespeare, I was really self-conscious being surrounded by people who claimed they'd been reading the complete works at age 7 or had just decades of examples of productions that they'd seen that they could refer to. I very much did not grow up immersed in Shakespeare in any way, and basically had to teach myself how to watch it and appreciate it. So these tips are basically how I did that, and maybe they'll be helpful for you too. I just realized my hair looks exactly like Shakespeare's there. Anyway, I just want to get this one out of the way up front. You don't have to like Shakespeare. Many Shakespeare plays are bad, and a lot of productions of Shakespeare are bad. If you've seen Shakespeare and just cannot like it, it might not be your fault. It might just be that you were seeing a bad play, and that's all right. Keep trying, and maybe you'll find one you like better. But maybe you have seen the best ever production of the best ever play and you still don't like it. That's fine too. There is no particular virtue in liking Shakespeare, no matter how people talk about him. It's not like cardio where you really need to just keep trying until you find a version that you like because it's really good for you. He's just a really famous writer and he might not be your cup of tea. If you really do want to like Shakespeare, I hope this video can help. But if you try these tips and still aren't having a good time, go. Be free. Do not worry about it. Shakespeare in production can be hard to follow sometimes, especially if there's a lack of clarity in the directing or the acting, or if there's some weird concept going on that's distracting from what the actual story is. A lot of productions know this and will put a summary of the plot into the program, or it's really easy to find them online. However, I think frantically studying the summary of the play you're about to see before going in can actually be more confusing. Constantly comparing in your head what you just read with what you're seeing on stage can be really distracting and actually leave you more confused than before. Here's what I suggest you do instead. Find somebody that you know who already knows the play fairly well and ask them a few simple questions. For example, you may ask them who the central 2 or 3 characters are and what they want. What are the obstacles that they face in getting those things? What is the general mood of the play, or a couple key thematic ideas, just simple ones, that can guide you through as you're thinking about it? I think this is a lot more helpful than trying to keep track of an entire plot in your head. It gives you something simple to focus on and anchor yourself in, even when you start to get a little confused. For example, if you're watching Hamlet and you're getting a bit mired in the language, oh, here comes Hamlet. I remember that what he wants to do is find out if his uncle killed his dad and then get revenge. I don't really understand what this speech is about, but he's talking about killing people and I know he wants revenge, so I think I can put it together. It's just a straightforward way to keep yourself anchored in the story without having an entire plot's worth of events to try to remember. Here's something it's easy to forget about Shakespeare. People in his own time period did not talk the way he wrote. We talk about how Shakespeare writes in verse, but that means a lot more than just iambic pentameter and line breaks. It means that the dialogue itself is poetry. So, like poetry, it's more convoluted, flowery, and complex than the way actual people speak. A random Elizabethan person going into a Shakespeare play also would have needed a bit of time to get used to the form of dialogue he was using, because it would not just be normal, recognizable speech from everyday conversation. And Shakespeare often builds in that time. It's normal that you won't start getting really crucial plot information until a little bit of a way into the first scene, and it usually gets repeated once or twice, just to give you time to catch up. So don't stress if you don't understand at the beginning of a Shakespeare play. Just try to relax and know that you'll get more used to the sound of the dialogue as it goes along. When I was in college, I was in a production of The Winter's Tale that went on a little mini tour to some local schools. I thought this was a slightly weird choice because The Winter's Tale is sort of infamously convoluted, both in terms of its plot and its actual dialogue. But to my pleasant surprise, even elementary school age students pretty much understood what was going on and were able to ask really insightful questions about the performance afterwards. It reminded me that when we're kids, we're used to not understanding every word that we hear coming from movies and TV just because our vocabulary isn't very big yet, so we just don't worry about it. That's actually a really useful way to approach watching Shakespeare. Instead of panicking every time a word comes up that we don't understand, it's okay to just sit back and let the sense of the words wash over us and have confidence that eventually we'll catch up and through context work out what's going on. That said, you can't really be a totally passive consumer of Shakespeare. Especially if you know you struggle a little bit to understand the dialogue, it's really worth it to put in the effort to lean forward a little bit and actively listen. I know that sounds silly, but it's really not the same way that we take in movies and TV, where you can sit back and be a bit passive, knowing that the story will come to you. With Shakespeare, you have to just put in a little more effort, almost like you're listening to a lecture or to something in class, so that you can focus on picking up the meaning of the dialogue. It is admittedly a slightly exhausting way of watching, which is what intermissions are for. But it really is worth it if you're trying to put in the effort to understand Shakespeare, and soon you'll find that it comes more and more easily. After the play is the time to read a recap. You can brush up on plot points you think you missed, learn character names you didn't quite catch, or maybe be pleasantly surprised to find that actually you pretty much understood the whole thing. I don't think this step is totally necessary, but I'm surprised by how often people tell me they haven't understood something in a Shakespeare play, only for it to turn out that no, they actually did. This can be a good way to reinforce that the things you think you've understood, you have in fact understood. Plus, if you really liked the play, it's a nice way to really drive in the basics of the plot so that next time you see it, you can start focusing on different details besides just what's happening. So those are my practical tips for how to enjoy Shakespeare. If I wanted to speak more philosophically about it, I think the number one most important thing you can do is let go of anything you've been told about Shakespeare's genius and universality, and definitely ignore anyone who calls him the Bard. He is one writer who is writing of and for a very specific time period. It can be really interesting to learn more about that time period, which is part of what I hope this channel can do. Because then you can start to see why some of these weird things that he does are the way they are, and maybe appreciate them more. Or realize, nope, it's just weird. But you're allowed to find Shakespeare weird. He's not the greatest writer of all time, and he may not speak to you and your life. But he can be really interesting anyway.